The house sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, trimmed hedges and freshly painted shutters hiding the storm brewing beneath its walls. From the outside, it looked untouched, a picture-perfect suburban home. But for me, the returning soldier, it wasn't just a house. It was a place I had worked for, sweated for, and dreamed about while deployed overseas. Every day on base, I kept its image in my mind, a symbol of what I was protecting and the sanctuary I would come back to. But when my boots hit the driveway after months away, something felt off. A minivan parked in space I had left empty. Toys scattered across the yard I once manicured with military precision. The welcome mat I had picked out for my own home bore footprints of strangers. My stomach tightened. This wasn't right. I walked closer, scanning the porch. Wind chimes I never bought rattled in the breeze. Flower pots sat where I had never placed them. And then came the sound, a child's laugh drifting from inside the living room window. Someone was living in my home. The realization struck like incoming fire. I had locked everything before deployment, left my neighbor with a spare key just in case of emergencies. The HOA board had promised they would keep an eye on things, telling me not to worry. And now, through the glass of my own window, I was staring at furniture I didn't recognize, walls painted a different color, family photos that didn't include me. It didn't take long before the truth came out. The HOA had decided my property was wasting potential. With me overseas, they claimed it was their responsibility to maintain the vibrancy of the community. Their solution? Renting out my home to strangers, pocketing the money under guise of administrative fees. They thought I wouldn't find out. They thought deployment meant silence. But they underestimated what silence builds inside a soldier. Neighbors avoided my gaze as I stood in the street, confusion giving way to anger. Some knew. They had seen the moving trucks, the new family settling in. But fear of Karen, the HOA president, kept their mouths shut. She ran the neighborhood like commander without rank, issuing fines, enforcing rules, and bending the board to her will. To her, my absence was just an opportunity. I reported the violation, called the authorities, but paperwork moved slower than the rage inside me. Civil courts required months to process disputes, and the HOA had behind layers of technicalities and contracts. They claimed the bylaws gave them emergency leasing rights to preserve property values. It was a lie, twisted from vague clauses, but it bought them time. What they didn't count on was me not being alone. My platoon, the men I had bled with, weren't just comrades. They were brothers. When they heard what happened, when word spread to the barracks about how the HOA stole my home while I was deployed, they didn't see it as a property dispute. They saw it as a betrayal. To them, a man fights for his country so that his home will be safe. And if the home isn't safe, then what was the fight for? One by one, they offered support, not through words, but through presence. Military trucks rolled through the neighborhood days later, their engines growling, as if carrying the weight of justice. Neighbors stepped back, peering through blinds, whispering about the convoy pulling into the quiet street. The rented family who had taken residence peeked through the window, startled by the sight. The HOA board members weren't so bold now. Their cars parked nervously in driveways, their phones lighting up with frantic calls. They thought I'd come back alone, powerless against the rules they had twisted. Instead, I returned with the strength of a platoon behind me, men who knew how to hold a line and how to reclaim what was stolen. That day, the neighborhood stopped being quiet. Boots marched across my driveway. Camouflage uniforms formed a wall of presence in front of my door. And for the first time since deployment, I felt control returning to my hands. But this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The HOA had lit a fire they couldn't put out. They had crossed a line, and now the battle was coming home. When the soldier's truck finally turned into his own driveway, the first thing he noticed was that his American flag, normally folded perfectly on the front porch, was gone. In its place was a set of mismatched wind chimes and a welcome friend sign that he had never purchased. His heart pounded. This wasn't just someone squatting in his home. The place had been fully repurposed, decorated, and lived in as if his ownership had been erased. Peering through the windows, he saw strangers' belongings everywhere. A flat-screen TV bolted to his wall, family portraits of people he didn't recognize, and laundry draped across his couch. His stomach dropped. The HOA hadn't just rented his house. They had handed it over like it was an apartment, stripping his life from within. The neighbors came outside cautiously, whispering amongst themselves. Some were supportive, nodding sympathetically at the returning veteran. Others crossed their arms, aligning themselves with the HOA, muttering about community rules and contracts. But one thing was certain. Everyone knew what had been done, and no one had stopped it. The renters emerged when they realized someone was outside. They looked confused, defensive, but also embarrassed. They explained quickly that they had been paying rent to the HOA for months, believing the property was legitimately available. They even had receipts signed by the board president herself. It was a cruel twist. The soldier wasn't just facing trespassers. He was staring at another family who had been deceived just as much as he had. And yet, the violation still cut deep. His home, his sanctuary, the place he had dreamed of during long desert nights, had been turned into a rental without his permission. The soldier contacted local authorities immediately, showing proof of ownership. But here's where the HOA's tangled web revealed itself. The board president had filed fraudulent paperwork while he was away, claiming he had abandoned the property. She leveraged her position to portray herself as the caretaker of the home, giving her false authority to lease it out. The police were hesitant, caught between legal technicalities. They told the soldier it was a civil matter, not a criminal one, at least not until the fraud could be proven in court. The renters technically had a lease agreement in hand, no matter how illegitimate its origins. The soldier's jaw tightened. This wasn't going to be solved with a simple call to the sheriff's office. Back at his base, word spread quickly. His platoon, men who had stood shoulder to shoulder with him overseas, were furious when they heard how the HOA had taken advantage of him. They remembered his letters, the way he spoke about his house, his son's laughter echoing in the backyard, and how much it meant to him to come back home to peace. Now, peace had been replaced with betrayal, and so the platoon made a pact. They would not let bureaucracy or HOA corruption rob their brother-in-arms of his home. The soldier had defended their country. Now, it was their turn to defend him. The plan wasn't reckless. It was precise. They would do things by the book, but make their presence felt in a way no HOA could ignore. As the sun set over the cul-de-sac, a convoy of military trucks began rolling in. Boots hit the pavement. Uniforms crisp, faces sharp with determination. Neighbors peeked through blinds as the sound of synchronized footsteps echoed down the street. The HOA president, who had been so confident in her control, now found herself staring at the sight of disciplined men prepared to reclaim what had been stolen. This wasn't just about property anymore. It was about honor, justice, and the promise that no soldier would ever be left defenseless, not abroad, and certainly not at home. The real battle for the house had just begun. And so, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, the neighborhood found itself caught in a quiet storm. The HOA's bold attempt to exploit an absent soldier had crossed a line that was impossible to ignore. The men who had stood shoulder to shoulder on the battlefield now stood shoulder to shoulder on suburban streets, determined to reclaim what was rightfully theirs. But the question lingered like smoke in the air. Was this about one house, or about the principle of respect, honor, and justice itself? The battle was far from over, and as the silence settled, you have to wonder, was this HOA prepared for the storm it had just awakened? And more importantly, was the soldiers' response justice or something far greater? What do you think? By now, the HOA's illusion of control was shattered. What they had underestimated was not just the loyalty of a platoon, but the willpower of a man who had sacrificed everything for his country. This was no longer a mere property dispute. It had become a clash of values, a test of integrity, and a moment where a community was forced to choose between blind authority and true justice. As the tension thickened, one truth became clear. Every choice comes with consequences, and the HOA's reckless decision to steal a soldier's home would come back heavier than they ever imagined. But the final blow had yet to fall. Was this justice in the making, or was it revenge disguised as righteousness? What do you think? And in the end, the house stood not just as brick and mortar, but as a symbol A reminder that those who defend their homes on foreign soil will never surrender them a home. The HOA had tried to profit off the absence of a man who gave his years to defend freedom, only to find that freedom itself fought back at their doorstep. The Platoon's silent unity sent a message far louder than any courtroom ever could. Respect cannot be stolen. Loyalty cannot be rendered injustice. When denied, we'll always find a way to rise again. But here's the real question. Was this true justice, or did the soldier and his platoon cross a line? Should wrongs be righted with equal force, or should they be left to the system, even when the system fails? What do you think? Was this justice served or justice rewritten?